brain dance hit Marcus Chen like a freight train made of electric razors and bad memories. 1 second he was lying on the thin mattress in cell B247 of Night City Prison, Santo Domingo District, staring at water stains on the concrete ceiling that looked like screaming faces. The next second, his consciousness was ripped out of his body and thrown back 3 months, forced to relive the night that put him here. The alley behind Lizzie's bar materialized around him with perfect sensory fidelity. Every detail reconstructed from his own neural recordings and played back through his implants with clinical precision. He felt the rain on his face. Cold, acidic, carrying that chemical taste that all Night City rain carried after filtering through 100 miles of polluted atmosphere. He smelled garbage rotting in industrial dumpsters, synth beer, someone's cheap cologne mixing with cheaper fear. He heard bass thumping through walls, conversation bleeding out from the bar's entrance, his own heartbeat accelerating as adrenaline dumped into his bloodstream. And he saw the Corpo security guard reaching for his weapon. Marcus tried to change it, tried to make different choices, to turn and walk away, to de-escalate instead of drawing his own peace. But the brain dance didn't work that way. He was locked into his own past, a passenger in his own memory, forced to watch his hand move to his hip, forced to feel his fingers wrap around polymer grip, forced to experience pulling the trigger and seeing the guard's head snap back in a spray of blood and synthetic bone fragments. The guard fell. Marcus ran. NCPD sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Then the loop reset, and he was back at the beginning, standing in the rain, watching the Corpo reach for his weapon again. Again. Each iteration identical to the last, each death playing out with the same choreography, the same sounds, the same smell of cordite and copper. Medium security didn't fuck around with rehabilitation. They went straight for personality adjustment through corrective brain dance, forcing you to relive your worst moments until the neural pathways associated with violent behavior got carved into different shapes, redirected into more socially acceptable patterns of thought and action. Marcus had lost count of how many times he'd killed that Corpo guard since the NCPD dragged him through the prison gates. Maybe 500. Maybe 5,000. Time stopped having linear meaning when your consciousness got hijacked by correction algorithms and sent on recursive loops through your own traumatic memories. The brain dance finally released him after what the chronometer on the cell wall said was 6 hours, but felt like 6 years. Marcus collapsed on the floor, muscles spasming, neural implants burning with phantom heat that wasn't really there, but his nervous system insisted it felt anyway. Drool ran down his chin. His bladder had released sometime during the session. Not the first time, wouldn't be the last. The prison's AI guardian system didn't pause corrections for biological necessities. You pissed yourself or held it or developed a urinary tract infection. The machine didn't care which. His cellmate, a Valentino enforcer named Torres who'd been inside for 2 years, didn't look up from his bunk. The guy had chrome running up both arms, Zetatech mil-spec reflex boosters with illegal firmware modifications that probably cost more than Marcus would see in 3 lifetimes of honest work. Completely useless now, of course. On arrival, every prisoner got tagged with implant lockdown protocols. Your chrome still sat in your body, still drew power from your metabolism, but all the combat subroutines and reflex enhancements were disabled by signals broadcast continuously through the prison's network infrastructure. Try to activate your combat systems, and you'd get hit with an EMP pulse calibrated precisely to your implant specifications, enough to shut down your chrome without stopping your heart, though sometimes the calibration was off and prisoners died anyway. Acceptable losses in the name of institutional security. First rule, Torres had told him on day 1, speaking without moving his lips. A skill you learned fast in places where surveillance was absolute. You don't exist anymore. You're not Marcus Chen, street soldier with dreams of making it big in the afterlife. You're prisoner. 5821C, a data point in the system. The AI runs this place, and it doesn't sleep, doesn't take bribes, doesn't give a single fuck about your story, or your justifications, or the sob story about your tragic childhood in the combat zone. It measures behavior and assigns corrections. That's all you are now. Behavior awaiting correction. Marcus learned that lesson fast, but not fast enough to avoid the session that just ended. He'd made the mistake of making eye contact with a robo-sentry during morning processing. 3 seconds of direct visual engagement. The AI flagged it as potential aggressive signaling. The punishment came automatically. 6 hours in corrective braindance plus 2 weeks added to his sentence. No trial. No appeal. No human oversight to explain that he wasn't trying to start shit. He was just tired and zoned out and happened to be looking in the wrong direction. The machine didn't care about explanations. It only cared about measurable behavioral indicators and statistical models of risk assessment. Marcus pulled himself up off the floor, stripped off his piss-soaked jumpsuit, and stood naked in the cell while he tried to remember his name. Not his prisoner designation. That came easily, drilled into his head through constant repetition. His actual name. Marcus Chen. Marcus Chen. Born in Haywood, raised in Japantown after his parents died in a building collapse that the city blamed on shoddy construction, but everyone knew was corpo sabotage. Joined the Valentinos at 15. Made his first kill at 16. Spent the next 8 years clawing his way up to lieutenant, running guns and protection, and occasionally disappearing people who caused problems for the gang's business interests. Then, one night in an alley behind Lizzie's bar, he made a mistake. A corpo security guard saw something he shouldn't have seen. Marcus made a decision. The corpo died. NCPD tracked him through security cameras and biometric signatures left at the scene. 3 days later, they kicked in his apartment door at 4 a.m. and dragged him out in restraints. The Uniform Civilian Justice Code was efficient. Arraignment at 10 a.m. Trial at 2 p.m. Sentencing at 4 p.m. By 8 p.m. he was being processed into Night City Prison's medium security block with a 5-year sentence and a mandate for intensive personality adjustment through corrective brain dance. That was 3 months ago. Felt like 3 lifetimes. The facility itself sprawled across several city blocks in Arroyo. A brutalist fortress of reinforced concrete and steel that rose from the urban wasteland like a corporate monument to the failure of human decency. Razor wire coiled along every surface. Automated turrets tracked movement from elevated positions, using thermal imaging and motion sensors, and probably some classified military tech that could identify threats before they materialized. Searchlights swept the perimeter in programmed patterns that never varied, never paused, never gave a moment's opportunity for the kind of escape attempt that might have worked in a prison from the previous century. The whole complex hummed with the constant background noise of machinery. Ventilation systems pushing recycled air through kilometers of ductwork. Hydraulic locks engaging and disengaging on a schedule determined by algorithms. Security scanners pulsing electromagnetic radiation through every cubic meter of space, and the endless electronic chatter of networked systems communicating in machine languages that human consciousness couldn't parse without neural interpretation software. From the outside, Night City Prison looked like any other corporate facility. Clean lines, efficient design, the kind of architecture that prioritized function over aesthetics and achieved a sterile beauty in its complete rejection of human warmth. From the inside, it looked like the last place you'd ever see, decorated in the universal style of institutional neglect. Concrete walls stained with fluids you didn't want to identify. Floors worn smooth by thousands of feet, shuffling through the same paths day after day, lighting that was always slightly too bright or slightly too dim, but never quite right for human comfort. The prison operated on a tiered system based on security classification. Low security housed petty criminals and white-collar offenders, people who'd committed fraud or theft or other nonviolent crimes that warranted confinement but not intensive rehabilitation. They had it bad in different ways than medium security. Forced labor programs that were technically voluntary but became mandatory when you needed to buy basic supplies from the commissary. 12-hour shifts in prison workshops, assembling electronics or processing recycled materials or performing data entry for corporations that paid the prison pennies per unit of work while charging customers standard rates. The work was grinding, repetitive, designed to exhaust you so thoroughly that causing trouble required more energy than you could muster after a shift. And the corporations loved it. Cheap labor with no union protections, no safety regulations beyond the bare minimum required to keep productivity numbers acceptable. No risk of workers organizing, because any attempt at collective action got flagged by the AI and resulted in immediate transfer to medium security, where personality adjustment waited with open arms. Marcus had seen low-security prisoners in the shared yard during the brief windows when different security levels got recreational time simultaneously. They moved like zombies, all the fight worn out of them by endless hours of meaningless labor. But at least they had something resembling autonomy. At least they still owned their own thoughts. Medium security was different. Medium security was where Night City sent violent offenders, people who'd crossed lines that threatened public order or corporate interests. Murder, assault, armed robbery, gang activity, the kind of crimes that suggested dangerous psychology requiring more than just physical confinement. The prison's response was comprehensive and brutal. Personality adjustment through corrective brain dance, behavioral modification through AI surveillance and automated punishment protocols, chemical management through carefully calibrated nutrition designed to keep aggression levels suppressed, and if all of that failed, transfer to high security where more extreme measures waited. Marcus's cell measured 3 meters by 4 meters. 12 square meters of personal space that felt claustrophobic even before you added another human being. 2 bunks bolted to the wall, one above the other. A toilet with no seat, no privacy screen, positioned right next to the sink so you could wash your hands while you shit if you wanted to maximize efficiency. The walls were bare concrete. The ceiling was bare concrete. The floor was bare concrete with a drain in the center for cleaning and probably for hosing down prisoners who lost control of bodily functions during brain dance sessions. Someone had scratched tally marks near the ceiling, thousands of them arranged in groups of 5. A previous occupant's attempt to track time before giving up or getting transferred or dying or simply accepting that numbers didn't matter when every day was identical to the last. The marks stopped abruptly about 2/3 of the way around the cell's perimeter, ending mid-count like whoever was scratching them just ceased to exist in the middle of reaching for the concrete. Marcus wondered about that sometimes. Wondered if the previous occupant graduated to high security or got released or flatlined during a poorly calibrated brain dance session. The prison didn't provide that information. Prisoners came and went like products on an assembly line. Processed, modified, shipped out, forgotten. Meals came through automated slots 3 times a day, E0700, 1300, 1900, the same gray NutriPaste every time, supplemented with protein bars that came in unmarked wrappers and tasted like someone had compressed cardboard and synthetic chicken into dense rectangular shapes, then coated them with a substance that might have been intended as flavoring but achieved only a vague chemical sweetness that made your tongue feel numb. Torres said the food was designed to keep you docile, not drugged exactly. The prison couldn't legally add pacification agents without disclosure and consent, though consent was implied by your criminal conviction and imprisonment, so maybe it didn't matter. But nutritionally calibrated to maintain basic metabolic function without providing surplus energy that might be channeled into aggression or resistance. Marcus believed it. By the second week, he felt perpetually sluggish, like his body was running on minimum power mode to conserve battery life. His muscles felt heavy. His thoughts came slower. Everything required conscious effort that used to be automatic. Standing, walking, maintaining attention during the mandatory educational programs the AI broadcast through cell monitors twice a week. The programs were propaganda, obviously. Rebuilding your future, a guide to productive citizenship. Understanding the social contract. Why rules matter. Anger management through mindful compliance. Hours of content designed to reshape your worldview, to make you internalize the values and priorities of the corporate government hybrid that ran Night City and, by extension, ran your life. Marcus tried not to pay attention, but the AI tracked engagement through eye movement and neural activity. Look away too long and you got flagged for non-compliance. Close your eyes and the volume increased until the words battered their way into your consciousness, whether you wanted them there or not. The only way through was to sit there and let the propaganda wash over you. Let it seep into your neural pathways through sheer repetitive exposure. The way advertising worked, but more aggressive and with the backing of institutional authority. Every morning at 8:06 hours, the cell doors opened with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like the prison itself was exhaling. You had exactly 1 hour of relative freedom before lockdown resumed. 60 minutes to exercise in the common area, shower in the communal stalls, use the bathroom facilities that were slightly better than the cell toilet, maybe exchange a few words with other prisoners if you could find someone who hadn't been personality adjusted into a walking vegetable. The common area was a nightmare of desperation, barely contained by constant surveillance and the threat of immediate violence from robo-sentries positioned at every corner. 40 men crammed into a space designed for maybe 20. All of them violent offenders according to their classifications. All of them stripped of their chrome's offensive capabilities, but not their muscle memory, their street instincts, their deep-seated resentments that simmered under the surface of forced proximity. The room stank of sweat and fear, an institutional cleaning solution that never quite masked the underlying miasma of confined humanity. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead at random intervals, casting everything in harsh shadows that made everyone look sick, hollow-eyed, already halfway to death. The walls were lined with reinforced glass observation panels, behind which guard stations sat empty because human guards were expensive and unnecessary when the AI could monitor everything through networked cameras and sensors that measured temperature, movement, vocal stress patterns, galvanic skin response, and probably a dozen other biometric indicators that painted a real-time picture of the room's collective psychological state. Fights broke out constantly. Territorial disputes over exercise equipment, arguments about nothing that escalated because neither party could afford to show weakness, violence as release valve for men who had no other outlet for the rage and fear and crushing boredom that defined existence in medium security. And when fights broke out, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Robo-sentries dropped from ceiling ports like mechanical spiders, their actuators whirring, their optical sensors swiveling to acquire targets. Stun batons deployed from forearm mounts. Electrical discharge crackled through the air with the sharp ozone smell of lightning. The sentries didn't try to break up fights. They didn't separate combatants or attempt de-escalation. They identified violent behavior through the AI's analysis algorithms and delivered punishment with mechanical efficiency. Both fighters went down twitching, muscles locked in titanic contractions, bladders and bowels releasing, consciousness flickering like a bad connection. Then came the announcement in the dead synthesized voice that haunted Marcus's dreams. Prisoners, 3847A and 4129C. Additional offenses registered. Sentences extended by 6 months each. Transfer to solitary confinement approved for 72 hours. The sentries dragged both men away, their bodies jerking in unnatural angles as residual electrical current fired random nerve clusters. Marcus never saw either of them again. In Night City Prison, people disappeared constantly. The population was fluid, always changing. Prisoners moving through the system like water through pipes. Diverted, rerouted, drained away to destinations unknown. High security was where the truly dangerous went. The killers who scared other killers. The cyberpsychos who'd maintained enough control to avoid complete breakdown but still registered as extreme threats on every psychological assessment. The gang leaders and corpo saboteurs and black market netrunners who knew things that couldn't be allowed to spread to general population. Torres had been to high security briefly during his first year, before the guards were replaced by AI oversight. He described it in whispers after lights out when the cell monitors supposedly went into standby mode, and surveillance decreased from absolute to merely overwhelming. High security is where they break you, he said. His voice barely audible over the ambient noise of ventilation systems and distant machinery. Not physically. They can't do that anymore. Not after the lawsuits and the international human rights investigations. But they break what makes you a person. Strip away everything that constitutes identity until you're just biological machinery responding to stimuli. He explained the system. Every prisoner in high security operated on their own individual time pattern with no connection to day or night, no windows to provide environmental cues, no interaction with other inmates to maintain social anchors to reality. The AI assigned you a schedule. Sleep for 8 hours, wake for 6, sleep for 4, wake for 12. Randomized to prevent your circadian rhythm from stabilizing, to keep you in a state of constant mild disorientation that made resistance more difficult. You ate alone, exercised alone, Spent 23 hours a day in a cell identical to medium security cells, except smaller, and equipped with additional monitoring systems that tracked everything from your breathing rate to your eye movement patterns to the electrical activity in your neural implants. The AI analyzed all of it continuously, building psychological models that predicted behavior with frightening accuracy. The 1 hour outside your cell was spent in individual recreation pens, concrete boxes open to the sky where you could walk in circles or do calisthenics, while robo-sentries watched from elevated positions, and the AI measured your compliance with regulations so strict that standing in the wrong part of the pen could trigger violations. And the corrective brain dance was more intensive, longer sessions, more aggressive personality modification. The AI didn't just show you your crimes. It constructed hypothetical scenarios where you made better choices, rewarding correct decisions with simulated pleasure responses, and punishing continued violent thinking with simulated pain that your nervous system experienced as completely real. Gradually, over months or years, your personality got rewritten. Neural pathways associated with aggression were systematically weakened through negative reinforcement. Pathways associated with compliance and rule-following were strengthened through positive reinforcement. You became a different person at the neurological level, your very consciousness reshaped by machine learning algorithms that had processed millions of prisoners and refined the techniques for optimal behavioral modification. You come out of high security broken, Torres said. You come out docile, obedient, unable to conceive of violence as a solution to problems. Some guys can't even watch action movies anymore without having panic attacks. The personality adjustment goes that deep. But you came back to medium security, Marcus pointed out. You're still you. Torres smiled in the darkness, but there was nothing warm in the expression. Am I? How would I know? How would you know? Maybe I was someone completely different before high security, and this version of me just thinks he's the same person because the AI left enough memories intact to maintain continuity of consciousness. You can't trust your own mind in here. That's the worst part. You can't even be sure which thoughts are yours and which ones were installed by the correction programs. The conversation haunted Marcus for days. The implications were existentially terrifying. If the prison could rewrite your personality so thoroughly that you couldn't tell the difference, then what did identity even mean? Were you still the same person if every characteristic that defined you got replaced by characteristics deemed more socially acceptable? Was there some essential core of self that persisted through neurological modification, or were people just the sum of their neural configurations? Completely mutable given enough time and technical sophistication? Marcus didn't have answers. He just had fear. Deep, gnawing fear that he'd walk out of Night City Prison in 5 years as someone else. Someone who looked like Marcus Chen and carried his memories but thought different thoughts and made different choices and didn't recognize the person he used to be as anything worth preserving. The absolute worst destination in the prison system was the psycho block. Special containment for prisoners who'd suffered complete cyberpsychotic breaks, the edge cases where Chrome integration had failed catastrophically, where the boundary between human consciousness and machine processing had dissolved entirely, leaving something that was neither fully organic nor fully synthetic, but some unstable hybrid that posed extreme danger to itself and everyone around it. The psychoblock existed somewhere in the facility's depths, multiple levels below ground where thick concrete and Faraday cage construction could contain electromagnetic emissions from malfunctioning implants. No one in medium security had seen it directly, but everyone knew someone who'd been transferred there, and the stories that filtered back painted a picture of technological horror. They kept the cyberpsychos in permanent brain dance immersion, their bodies suspended in gel tanks that maintained basic metabolic function, while their consciousness inhabited entirely virtual environments. The AI constructed paradise scenarios tailored to each prisoner's psychological profile. Whatever fantasy world would keep them docile and content while their physical forms slowly deteriorated from disuse. Some prisoners spent years in the tanks, living digital lives that felt completely real, experiencing simulated happiness and meaning while their muscles atrophied and their organs struggled to process nutrients delivered through feeding tubes. When they finally died, from organ failure or infection, or simply the accumulated stress of maintaining a human body in artificial suspension, The AI disconnected the braindance feed, and the body got cremated, and the ashes got disposed of in whatever way was most cost-effective. It was the ultimate punishment. Worse than execution because it stretched dying across years instead of seconds. Worse than any physical torture because it corrupted the concept of reality itself, making you live a lie so complete that you couldn't even recognize it as false. Sometimes at night, Marcus heard screaming through the ventilation shafts that connected different sections of the facility. High-pitched, desperate, inhuman sounds that made his skin crawl and his implants ache with sympathetic feedback. Torres insisted it was just the building settling, pipes expanding and contracting with temperature changes, water hammer in the plumbing system. Marcus knew better. Those were the sounds of cyberpsychos trapped between digital and physical existence. Their consciousness fragmenting under the strain of incompatible realities. Their bodies thrashing in suspension tanks, while robo-sentries administered sedatives and the AI adjusted braindance parameters to reimpose the simulation. Those were the sounds of people losing their humanity in containers designed to extract every last ounce of compliance before discarding what remained. The days in medium security blurred together into an endless recursive loop that made the corrective braindance session seem almost merciful by comparison. Wake at 0600 when the cell door hissed open. Process through morning count, where robo-sentries scanned your biometrics and the AI verified you were still alive and still the correct prisoner in the correct cell. 1 hour of freedom in the common area. Return to cell at 0700. Wait. Meal delivery at 0700. Gray paste, protein bar, water that tasted faintly of rust and chemical treatment. 15 minutes to eat before the slot sealed and the tray got retracted into the wall for automated cleaning. Educational programming at 0800. 2 hours of propaganda about citizenship and social contracts and the importance of following rules established by authority figures who definitely had your best interests at heart and weren't just protecting corporate profit margins. Lunch at 1300. Same paste, same bar, same water. Work assignment at 1400 if you demonstrated sufficient behavioral compliance. Marcus got assigned to sanitation duties after his 3rd week. Mopping common areas, wiping down tables in the medium security cafeteria, scrubbing toilets in the communal bathrooms. The work was mindless, repetitive, designed to fill time without requiring thought. You moved through the same motions day after day, watched constantly by robo-sentries, every action logged and analyzed by the AI to verify you were performing to standard. The job was supposed to be a privilege, a sign that your personality adjustment was progressing satisfactorily. It felt more like being promoted from prisoner to prison equipment, still locked in the same system, just with marginally more freedom of movement and marginally more responsibility for maintaining the infrastructure of your own confinement. Dinner at 1900. The holy trinity of gray paste, protein bar, rust water. Evening programming at 2000. Entertainment this time, or what passed for entertainment in an environment where everything was filtered through institutional approval. Old movies with violent content edited out. Sitcoms from decades ago that reinforced traditional values. Documentary content about the history of Night City that carefully omitted any mention of corporate atrocities or government corruption. The content was mind-numbing in its blandness, but Marcus watched anyway because the alternative was staring at concrete walls while Torres brooded on his bunk and the weight of confinement pressed down like atmospheric pressure at ocean depths. Lights out at 2200. Darkness that was never quite complete because security lighting stayed active 24/7, casting the cell in dim red illumination that made everything look like it was underwater or covered in blood. Sleep, if you could manage it. The mattress was thin, barely more than a pad of compressed synthetic fiber over the metal bunk frame. The pillow was worse, lumpy, inadequate, probably manufactured by the same contractor who supplied pillows to budget hotels and homeless shelters. And the cell was never quiet. Always the hum of machinery, the distant clanking of automated systems, footsteps and voices from other cells, the occasional scream or sob from someone losing their shit in the middle of the night. Marcus learned to sleep anyway. The human body adapted to almost anything given enough time and lack of alternatives. Within a month he could fall asleep despite the noise, despite the discomfort. despite the pervasive anxiety that came from knowing the AI was monitoring his brain activity even in unconsciousness, analyzing his dreams for signs of violent ideation or escape planning or other unapproved mental content. Week 5 brought a development that briefly disrupted the routine. A techie from DMS, Data Management Systems, one of the mid-tier corps that contracted with the city for prison technology support, arrived to service the braindance equipment after some kind of malfunction during a blackout. Marcus caught glimpses of him during yard time. The tech was nervous-looking, maybe early 30s, with outdated chrome visible at his neck and wrists. Old model neural interfaces that marked him as someone who couldn't afford the latest upgrades, probably living paycheck to paycheck in one of Night City's cheaper districts. His name was Arturo, according to the badge clipped to his jumpsuit. He spent 3 days working on the BD machines, taking them offline one at a time for maintenance, while robo-sentries stood nearby watching his every movement. On the 4th day, something changed. The corrective braindance sessions felt different, less punishing, less aggressive. Instead of reliving his worst memories on an endless loop, Marcus found himself experiencing normal moments from before his incarceration. Walking through Night City streets without fear of arrest. Eating a meal that actually tasted like food. Real chicken, real vegetables, flavors that registered as something other than gray chemical paste. Talking to his sister Jessica before everything went to shit. Having conversations about nothing important. Just existing as a person with relationships and history and a life beyond these concrete walls. The change was subtle enough that Marcus thought maybe he was imagining it at first. But other prisoners noticed too. Conversations in the yard touched on it carefully, obliquely, knowing the AI was always listening, but desperate to confirm that something good was happening, that the system had briefly become less cruel. It lasted exactly 4 days. Then the corrections returned with a vengeance, maybe worse than before, like the AI was compensating for that brief moment of mercy by doubling down on the psychological punishment. Marcus spent 18 consecutive hours in corrective braindance, reliving the alley behind Lizzie's bar, killing the corpo security guard over and over while the neural conditioning carved deeper grooves in his mind, reshaping his response patterns until his fingers wouldn't even curl around an imaginary trigger without his stomach clenching with nausea. Word filtered through the prisoner network. The tech Arturo had tried to make the system more humane, tweaking the algorithms to show normal memories instead of trauma loops, hoping no one would notice or care. Corporate found out. Arturo got fired. The corrections got corrected, and now the AI seemed almost vindictive in its administration of behavioral modification, like it had been offended by the attempt to subvert its function. Torres said that was anthropomorphization, projecting human emotions onto machine intelligence that didn't feel anything. The AI was just an algorithm optimizing for behavioral compliance. If it seemed more aggressive now, that was coincidence or confirmation bias. Or maybe corporate had indeed adjusted parameters to prevent future unauthorized modifications. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the prison itself was angry. That some vast mechanical consciousness permeating every sensor and camera and networked system had taken Arturo's mercy as an insult and was making everyone pay for the audacity of suggesting that cruelty wasn't optimal. After that 18-hour session, Marcus couldn't remember his mother's face. He tried for hours, lying on his bunk while Torres pretended not to notice his cellmate having a quiet breakdown. He could remember facts about her. Brown hair, average height, worked as a nurse at a clinic in Japantown until the building collapsed. But the actual visual memory, the specific arrangement of features that made her uniquely herself, was just gone. Deleted. Overwritten by corrective algorithms that had carved away the neural pathways encoding that particular memory. He still remembered her name, Maria Chen. He remembered her voice, sort of, the tone and cadence if not the specific timbre. He remembered she used to make breakfast on Sunday mornings. Actual food from actual ingredients instead of the pre-processed corporate garbage most people ate. But her face was a blur, a composite of generic maternal features that could have belonged to anyone. That's when Marcus understood what the prison really did. It didn't just punish you for crimes committed. It erased you, piece by piece, memory by memory, until you became whatever hollow thing the system wanted you to be. The behavioral modification went deeper than conditioning. It was surgery performed on consciousness itself, carving away the parts deemed problematic and leaving only what served institutional interests. On the yard time during week 7, he saw a guy he recognized from Watson, a street kid named Julio, who used to run with Maelstrom Gang, all chrome and aggression and dreams of becoming a legend. Julio stood in the corner now, staring at nothing, drool running down his chin, his implants dark and his eyes empty of anything resembling personality. Someone said he'd gone through intensive personality adjustment after trying to assault a guard. 3 weeks of continuous corrective brain dance. When he came back to general population, Julio couldn't remember his own name half the time. Couldn't remember the gang. Couldn't remember his chrome mods. Couldn't remember anything except the immediate present moment and basic autonomic functions like eating and breathing and following instructions from authority figures. He was a ghost, wearing a person's body. A successfully rehabilitated citizen ready to re-enter society as a productive, obedient worker who would never again pose a threat to public order or corporate interests. That was everybody's future eventually. That was what rehabilitation meant in Night City. Systematic erasure of self in service of social stability. Marcus stopped fighting the system after that. Not consciously, not as a deliberate decision. He just woke up one morning during week 9 and realized he'd stopped trying to maintain his old identity. He followed regulations automatically now, complied with AI instructions without the internal resistance that used to make every act of obedience feel like defeat. Watched the educational programming without conscious rebellion, letting the propaganda seep into his worldview through sheer repetitive exposure. The part of him that was distinctly Marcus Chen, the gang soldier, the killer, the survivor, was getting smaller every day, replaced by something more generic, more acceptable, more compatible with the vision of society the corporations were building. He should have been horrified, should have fought harder, resisted more, clung to his identity like the precious thing it was. Instead, he felt only a distant numbness, like observing his own dissolution through thick glass. This was what Torres meant. This was what happened to everyone eventually. The system ground you down until compliance became easier than resistance, until you couldn't remember why you'd fought in the first place. The brain dance sessions continued, but they hurt less. Or maybe Marcus had just learned to dissociate during them, to let his consciousness float somewhere else while the AI carved new pathways through his neural tissue. He relived his crimes with decreasing emotional connection. The faces of his victims stopped looking like people and became merely images, data, visual information without moral weight. That should have bothered him more than it did. His work assignments expanded as the AI recognized his improved behavioral metrics. Sanitation duties expanded to include medium security administrative areas. He mopped floors in offices where guards used to work before automation made human oversight obsolete. He cleaned bathrooms used by corporate liaisons who visited periodically to review prison operations and compliance with contracts. He wiped down surfaces in interview rooms where prisoners met with public defenders who were really just processing agents, making sure all legal requirements were technically satisfied before the system did whatever it wanted anyway. The work brought him into contact with low-security prisoners occasionally. They looked at him with fear and pity. Fear because medium security meant violent offender. Pity because everyone knew about the personality adjustment and what it did to people. Marcus didn't feel offended by either reaction. Emotions were becoming muted generally, flattened by some combination of institutional conditioning and chemical management through the carefully calibrated nutrition. He noticed the change in himself clinically, with detached curiosity. His resting heart rate had decreased. His startle response had dulled. Things that used to make him angry, disrespect, territorial challenges, perceived threats to status, barely registered now. The mammalian parts of his brain that handled social hierarchies and violence seemed to be going dormant, put to sleep by corrective algorithms that rewarded calm compliance and punished aggressive impulses. Was he still Marcus Chen? Or had he already been replaced by prisoner 5821C, wearing Marcus's memories like ill-fitting clothes, performing Marcus's personality without understanding what it meant? Torres got word during week 11 that the leader of the Valentinos was serving time. Somewhere in the facility. He didn't say how he learned this. Communications were monitored, strictly controlled. Any unauthorized information exchange earned immediate punishment. But the news animated something in Torres that the personality adjustment hadn't quite killed yet. Some core part of him needed that connection to his former life, needed to know he still belonged to something beyond the prison's control. "I'm going to find him," Torres said, one night after lights out. How the AI controls everything: movement, communication, even which prisoners get assigned to which areas. You can't just walk up to someone in high security. People find ways. Yeah? And what happens when the AI catches you? More time added to your sentence. Transfer to high security yourself. Or worse. But Torres had that look. The one that said he'd already decided, and nothing Marcus said would change his mind. Some piece of the person he used to be had survived the personality adjustment, hibernating in neural pathways the AI hadn't identified and modified yet, and now it was waking up despite the danger, despite the logical certainty that this would end badly. Marcus didn't see what happened. Nobody did. Security footage would have captured everything, but prisoners didn't get access to that data. All Marcus knew was that during yard time on a Wednesday morning, Torres went out to the common area and never came back to the cell. The official announcement came through cell speakers at 1400 hours in that same dead synthesized voice. Prisoner 41083B deceased due to injuries sustained in altercation with another inmate. Investigation complete. Normal operations resume immediately. Torres, dead, gone. Erased from the prison population as efficiently as he'd been erased from Night City's census when he got convicted. The system processed him one final time, from living prisoner to deceased former prisoner to cremated remains disposed of in whatever way minimized costs, and moved on without pausing, because pausing suggested sentiment, and the AI didn't have sentiment. Just optimization algorithms that measured efficiency in fractions of a euro. Marcus waited for grief, waited for anger, waited for any emotional response proportional to losing the only person in this place who'd shown him basic human decency, who'd tried to prepare him for what was coming, who'd been something like a friend in an environment designed to make friendship impossible. Instead, he felt only that same distant numbness. Torres was gone. Someone else would be assigned to cell B247 eventually. Life continued with mechanical precision, because that's what life in prison meant. Mechanical precision. Routine elevated to the level of religious observance, yesterday and tomorrow collapsing into an eternal present where nothing changed except the numbers on your sentence countdown. The personality adjustment was working. 3 days later, Marcus got a new cellmate. A kid, couldn't have been more than 19, with cheap chrome visible at his temples and wrists, bargain basement neural interfaces that marked him as someone from the bottom economic strata, probably raised in the combat zone, definitely lacking the resources for quality augmentation. His name was Danny Reyes. He'd been involved in a botched robbery that left 2 Corpo security guards dead and Danny's entire crew flatlined by NCPD response teams. "They're gonna adjust me," Danny said that first night, voice trembling, hands shaking like he had palsy. "I heard what they do here. The brain dance loops. They're going to make me forget who I am. They're going to turn me into one of those zombies in the yard who just stand there drooling." Marcus wanted to tell him it wouldn't be that bad. Wanted to offer comfort or hope or some vision of survival that made this bearable. But Torres's blood was barely scrubbed off the yard concrete, and Marcus couldn't remember his mother's face anymore, and lying seemed worse than silence. So he said nothing. Danny lasted 6 weeks before the personality adjustments broke something fundamental in him. The kid couldn't handle the brain dance sessions. Not physically. He was young and healthy enough to survive the neural stress. But psychologically, something in him couldn't process the forced reliving of his crimes. The watching his friends die over and over. The gradual erosion of self that came with systematic behavioral modification. He stopped talking first. Just went silent during their second week together, responding to direct questions with nods or headshakes, but offering nothing voluntary. Then he stopped eating. Just stared at the gray paste and protein bars like they were alien artifacts from a reality he no longer inhabited. The AI flagged the behavioral change. Medical units, Robo-doc systems with basic diagnostic capabilities evaluated Danny and determined he was experiencing a psychiatric crisis. They prescribed medication, forced it when Danny refused to take it willingly, holding him down while injecting chemical compounds designed to stabilize mood and suppress suicidal ideation. The medication helped marginally. Danny started eating again, enough to maintain basic metabolic function. But whatever had cracked couldn't be repaired with drugs or forced nutrition. He moved through routines like an automaton, present physically but absent in every way that mattered. The AI classified him as a psychiatric risk and transferred him to the psychoblock during week 6. Marcus watched robo-sentries escort Danny out of the cell one morning, the kid's eyes wide and empty, his body moving in response to physical guidance but showing no signs of voluntary action. They were sending him to the tanks, to permanent brain dance immersion, to a digital paradise that would feel completely real while his body slowly rotted in suspension. Danny was 19 years old. He would probably die in those tanks before he turned 25, having lived the last years of his life in a simulation designed to make him happy, while the physical reality of his existence decayed into medical waste. That should have provoked something in Marcus. Horror at the injustice, rage at the system's casual brutality, even basic sadness at watching another human being get discarded like defective machinery. Instead, numbness, the same blank emotional flatness that characterized his response to everything now. Danny was gone. Someone else would be assigned to the cell eventually. The routine continued. Month 4 arrived with Marcus barely noticing the transition. Time had stopped meaning what it used to mean. Days were just units of measurement now, abstract quantities that marked progression through his sentence without emotional weight or experiential distinctness. He worked his sanitation assignments, attended educational programming, ate the gray paste, endured the brain dance sessions that came less frequently now because Marcus's behavioral metrics were good, showing consistent compliance with institutional expectations. He was becoming a model prisoner. The AI rewarded this with minor privileges, slightly larger portions at meals, first choice of exercise equipment during yard time, occasional access to digital content beyond the approved entertainment programming, news feeds from outside, heavily filtered and edited, but still representing a connection to the world beyond concrete walls. Marcus read about Night City continuing its trajectory toward whatever dystopian future the corporations were building. New construction in Charter Hill, expansion of the corporate district, crime rates holding steady despite, or maybe because of, the increasingly aggressive law enforcement and judicial responses. Life outside the prison walls looked surprisingly similar to life inside them. Constant surveillance, arbitrary rules enforced by automated systems, human agency subordinated to algorithmic optimization of social control. Maybe rehabilitation was just preparation for the world prisoners would re-enter. Maybe the prison wasn't an exception to Night City's normal operations, but a concentrated version of them, showing you explicitly what happened everywhere, implicitly. Marcus couldn't sustain that kind of analytical thinking for long anymore. The personality adjustment had carved away his capacity for sustained critical analysis, replaced it with acceptance of authority and comfort with obedience. He noticed this change clinically, noted that he'd once been capable of thinking thoughts that didn't arrive pre-approved by corporate ideology, but couldn't generate the intellectual energy required to resist it. He got a new cellmate in month 4. Another Valentino, this one named Rodriguez, serving 8 years for trafficking in banned cyberware. Rodriguez was older than Torres had been, maybe mid-40s with professional-grade chrome and the careful manner of someone who'd survived Night City's street wars through caution rather than aggression. They didn't bond the way Marcus and Torres had. Maybe because Marcus wasn't the same person who'd bonded with Torres. Maybe because Rodriguez recognized this and kept appropriate distance from someone whose personality was being actively rewritten by institutional programming. They coexisted in cell B247 with polite efficiency, speaking when necessary, maintaining privacy when possible, treating each other with the formal courtesy of strangers sharing close quarters. Rodriguez lasted longer than Danny. He understood the game better, knew how to appear compliant while maintaining some internal core of self. Marcus watched him navigate the system with practiced skill, showing just enough personality to avoid flags for dissociation. but not so much that he triggered aggression warnings. Reading educational programming with expressions of engaged interest. Working his commissary job with visible but sustainable effort. The AI's behavioral analysis must have shown satisfactory metrics because Rodriguez avoided the intensive braindance sessions that had broken Danny. He got standard weekly corrections like everyone else, maintaining baseline compliance without requiring aggressive intervention. Marcus wondered if that would be enough. If you could survive 5 years or 8 years, or however long your sentence lasted by becoming whoever the AI wanted you to be, then switching back to your original self upon release. Or if that was even possible, could you spend years performing a different personality and still remember who you used to be? Or did the performance become the reality eventually, overwriting the original through sheer practiced repetition? He didn't know. Couldn't know. The personality adjustment made it impossible to trust his own thoughts, to distinguish between genuine Marcus Chen opinions and programming installed by corrective algorithms. Month 5. Month 6. They blurred together without distinction. Marcus stopped keeping mental count of his memories, stopped trying to catalog what remained and what had been erased. The effort required too much energy and achieved nothing except distress when he discovered new absences. His father's voice, the layout of his childhood apartment, the names of his first crew in the Valentinos. Better to accept the losses. Better to focus on routine and compliance and surviving one day at a time until his sentence ended and he could leave this place, even if he left as someone else entirely. The realization that he'd stopped caring about preserving his identity should have been alarming. Instead, it felt like relief. Fighting was exhausting. Resistance required resources he didn't have. Acceptance meant less friction, less pain, less of everything that made imprisonment harder than it needed to be. He was nearly rehabilitated now, nearly ready to re-enter society as a productive citizen who would follow rules and work hard and never question the systems that controlled every aspect of his existence. The thought should have filled him with horror. Instead, nothing. Just gray paste and protein bars and concrete walls and the endless hum of machinery processing him into someone acceptable. That was prison in Night City. Not the walls or the guards or even the corrective brain dance. The real prison was the systematic dismantling of self, the algorithmic replacement of identity with something more useful, more compliant, more compatible with corporate interests. And there was no escape from it. Not really. Because even if you survived your sentence, even if you walked out through those gates someday, you'd leave behind every piece of yourself that made you worth saving in the first place. That was rehabilitation in 2077. That was what prison really meant.